Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to the Van Buren Variety Show. I am Bob Van Buren, your host. Always glad to see you all week after week, once a week here, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Central Time and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all to my subscribers that's out there and the people that tune in week after week. Special thanks to all my guests that have appeared on the show. This is episode 101. Oh, wow. It has been a great journey, I have to tell you, and I couldn't do it without my great guests that come on this show, and I couldn't do it without my great audience that tune in week after week. So it's very humbling. I thank you for the support. Thank you for some of the emails that I've received. Some of you have been emailing me and contacting me about certain subjects you'd like to see on the show, and even one person suggested a person they'd like to have on this show. So, hey, we'll see what we can arrange, see if we can get those on there, because this is your show as well too. You got to let me know some subjects you'd like to see or talk about, and definitely do what I can to arrange that to be on the show. So again, welcome all, and those of you that haven't subscribed yet, if you look real carefully, I bet there's a subscribe button that is up on your screen somewhere. So hit that, and you'll get upcoming notices of what's going to be here on the Van Buren Variety Show. Again, welcome all. Hope you've all had a great week so far. I have, because I'll tell you a little personal story. For more than a decade now, every year that goes by, I buy a yearly planner. So I can talk, write down my appointments, write down notes. Hey, do this, doctor's appointment here, get car inspected here. But I always look back, I would throw that away at the end of the year, and then I'd start a new year. But then I'd be like, wait a minute, I can't remember what day did I do this last year. It's too late. I've already shredded it. So finally, this year, I wised up, and I didn't get a yearly planner. I got, if you see it, a 5-year journal. So now, starting this year, if I want to keep appointments or find out what I was doing on a certain day, keep track of, when a new roof was put on, or when did I go to the doctor to see that? Oh, that was on such and such day. So a 5-year planner will really, really do that for me. So I have a one-track mind. Once it's gone, I'll sleep and I'll forget all about it. So if you want to keep track, maybe a 5-year planner might be good for you, because a yearly planner, once it's gone, it's gone. I throw it away. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I've really enjoyed this book. So highly recommend get you a journal for 5 years if you want to keep track of your appointments. That's enough for me. I have got a great guest on tonight, and if you're looking for a career path, specifically a career coach to kind of give you the advice and share his expertise with you, and best of all, this guest tonight has written a book that I'm sure that you will all enjoy, and I'll let him tell about it. So without further ado, I will give you my guest tonight from Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tony Pisanelli. Tony, welcome to the Van Buren Variety Show.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak in front of your audience. Hopefully, we'll make them make this worth their time. So again, thank you.
Absolutely. Now, you are a business author and a career coach. For those that's not familiar, tell us about a career coach. What exactly is involved being a career coach?
Well, there are different levels when it comes to career coaching, and mine is specifically targeted at a certain area.
Mm-hmm.
What I found later in my employment life was a lot of people were made redundant or fired from their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob, in that case, what their employer did was they would send them off to these employment advising services, and they would help them find their next job. They would polish their resume, brush up on their interview skills, because typically they hadn't gone for an interview for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and they would help them do job searches for them. And that was well and good, and it served some people, but there were certain people who lost their job, Bob, and they were gutted by the experience.
I've heard of that.
It wasn't just their job. Their identity went out the door, their self-esteem, their ego took a hit, particularly if it was a male and they were the main breadwinner in the house. And in some cases, they may become bitter and angry towards their employer. Well, who helped them in that situation? There was no counselling service offered. So that's where I stepped in and thought, okay, that's an area or a niche that I can help these people with. Because I genuinely believe, and there was an American gentleman by the name of Hal Lancaster who said, being fired is nature's way of telling you you're in the wrong job in the first place.
I like that.
Maybe it looks like the deed of an evil employer got rid of you, but maybe there's something behind that, and it's nature coming in, or the universe, or God, call it what you will, that said, you don't belong here anymore. A bit like when a bird throws its young birds out of the nest, you need to go somewhere else.
Yep, throw them out.
Yeah. And now, is that a cruel act, or is that just nature's way of saying you need to grow up somewhere else?
It's nature's way, obviously. It's not being a cruel, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But you could see it one way or the other. And that's the sort of work I do with some of these executives in particular, to say, okay, let's look at the positive, because there's really no value in becoming bitter and holding on to the past. I started my employment journey, Bob, I don't know whether you did, but at a time or in an era where the job for life was an expectation. I know you talked in a recent episode with Gordon Griffith about being in the radio, and then a lot of people lost their jobs because of automation and what have you.
I'm a victim of that, yep.
Exactly. Jobs don't come with guarantees. They didn't back then, and they certainly don't today. You need to take responsibility for that. So be grateful for the time they did employ you and they allowed you to earn an income, but now's the time to move on and move forward and look at how you can leverage what you learned with your previous employer for the next adventure in your working life.
I've been there. You sound like you're talking about my life. Give you a little brief history of me. I was in the aircraft assembly business for quite a number of years, assembly, and I liked it. It was easy work. I got paid a good salary. I was at that point, I was in my 20s. I thought, this is where I'm going to be forever. Well, as with every company, especially if you're a laborer, there's layoffs. A contract gets lost, a contract doesn't get renewed, etc. And so when that happened, I was just, what do I do? And I got angry with my employer. I took it personal, of course, like a lot of people do. Like I just felt like, my career's over. My life's over. This is all I know is aircraft assembly. I don't know any other skill. But, long story short, I went back to school. Took some college courses while I was unemployed, took some accounting and business, and long story short, got into a banking job, entry level in data processing, but just kind of worked my way up, and now, over 25 years later, I'm a software tester now.
So, Bob, was there anywhere you could go at that point, a counsellor or anyone, to sort of vent your feelings or to get over it? Was there anything available to you?
I'm sorry, it wasn't you. My earphone kind of messed up. What was your question again, Tony? I'm sorry.
The question is, at that time, was there anything available to you, a counsellor or something, that helped you get over that?
Yeah, I did talk to some people. In fact, there was a person, they weren't a career coach per se, but the person was already in banking and a vice president. And even some people were telling me, Bob, in this economy now, it is probably not a good idea to stay in assembly. It's so uncertain. People are getting laid off. So this person kind of told me about the banking business, what she did. And so I guess you could say she was kind of acting as a career coach. She put in a good word for me too, even though I didn't have any real experience, but it was entry level. And so I would say she kind of encouraged me. She was there to kind of get me going. And so, she kind of, I guess you could say, cushioned the blow, especially helping me getting over self-pity. Oh, I'm unemployed. Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. Oh, my life is over. I don't know. And now, over 25 years later, I'm like, man, how could I feel that way? So it really helps to have that support. Just talk to people. I kept it in for the longest time, but you can't get help if you keep it in. You've got to reach everybody. Hey, I'm unemployed. I don't have any job skills. I need help. Can you give me a head up? And there's always people that'll do that for you.
Okay, let me ask you a question I ask my clients, Bob, in that moment. What part of you was actually glad to be out of that place?
Looking back, how that worked out, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, look back on it. It would have been a dead end job. It was. I told you it was a great job. I got paid a great salary, but it was one specific thing that I did all the time on this assembly line. I did that, did nothing else. And I think, as outgoing as I am, and I like to try new things, I would have gotten bored silly. I would have maybe shriveled up because I'm like, okay, I put this part here, and I cut it to specs, and I put it what I would call in the cure room, the oven room. Okay, then I do the next part, do the same thing. And looking back, Tony, I can't see doing that for 30, 35 years of my life. Yeah, I would have just shriveled up. I'm like, okay, what's the point? Whereas the job I'm in now, no 2 days is alike. I could have 5 projects one day, 3 defects, and the next day it's a whole different project. I mean, it's making phone calls to vendors, new software coming in to test. So I like hate to use the word, maybe variety. So looking to answer your question, it helped me not have the blinders on basically, and just do the same thing repetitionally over and over. No, in other words, no challenges, no promotion, just that's what I do. And I'm like, I wouldn't want to do that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, no personal growth. So can you see, Bob, from what you've just told me, nature was actually doing you a favour?
By being laid off, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's what I get my clients to see, because they can't see that other side. They just focus on what they've just lost, not what they've gained from it. Hey, the universe is saying, Bob, there is far more for you to do in this world than just be putting a little part in a cog or something.
Mm-hmm. I see that now.
Yeah. If you had have realised that in the moment, then the bitterness, the hatred, the anger disappears.
Right, the self-pity, basically, yes.
Exactly, you don't stew in it. I collect stories around careers, and there was a gentleman who wanted to be a singer. Mm-hmm. You've been in the radio space, so you can have affinity to this story.
Yeah, we promoted singers.
And as a young boy, he grew up in Scotland.
Okay.
And in the early 50s, there was no such thing as a TV set in the home. Mm-hmm. So their form of entertainment, Bob, was each of the family members had to get up and sing to the rest of the family.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And this young gentleman developed a liking for singing and became quite good at it. And in fact, if I remember the story correctly, his father took him to the local pub and made him sing in front of the patrons at the pub. Mm-hmm. And he obviously developed confidence to speak in front of an audience. So the family eventually, the father decided, we're going to move to Australia because there's more opportunities for work. Mm-hmm. So the young man sort of cast aside his ambition for being a singer, albeit he had been the lead singer for a band playing in certain venues of an evening. But that wasn't something he thought was going to become his main career.
Sure.
So he turns up at work, he found a job working in a factory, and on the very first day, it was a hot Australian day, he's in the factory, And by about 4 o'clock, he's covered in perspiration and soot and dirt from this factory work. And he turned to his fellow work colleague next to him and said, "Doug, this was a hard slog of a day." And Dougie turned around to him and he said, "John, the first 40 years are the worst."
Oh, the first 40 years.
Yeah, the first 40 years are the worst. He goes, "Well, I'm not sticking around here for 40 years. And he decided, I am going to give this singing caper a go. And he went back to the band. I think he may have kept his job while the other stuff was being developed. And he eventually got discovered, became a national star here in Australia. And his name is John Paul Young. And he sang the song Love Is in the Air.
Yeah, wow.
And that song will now immortalise him, because every Valentine's Day in Australia, the radio stations all play it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they play it here too. Lots.
And many other artists have copied that song as well. And can you see that someone saying to John, the first 40 years are the worst, was the impetus for him to say, no, I'm pursuing my dream of singing.
That's awesome. That's a great success story. Yeah. So, imagine what we'd have lost if he just wallowed in his self-pity and didn't do anything with it. So we would have lost that wonderful, wonderful song.
It was interesting. He appears on TV regularly and people interview him. And there was an interviewer asked him a few years ago, he goes, "John, you have been in the music industry for 50 years. Why don't you retire?"
Wow.
And John goes, "You don't understand. This isn't a job. This is something I love to do." The job was when he was working in that factory.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And there's so many few people can actually create a life around doing something they love.
Well, I've always heard the saying that, if you like what you do, it's not really a job at that point.
Exactly. It's not hard work. There's still challenges, there's still ups and downs, there's still highs and lows, but it's got a different feel to it. And people talk about the basics of longevity being around a healthy diet, stress management, eating proper nutrition. But one of the things, Bob, they overlook is the importance of doing something you truly love. I came across a story online of a gentleman called Anthony Mancello, American gentleman, and he was a barber and he really loved what he did. Okay, again, not a job, but something higher than that. And one day, a guy walks into the barber shop and said, "How old are you?" 65. And Anthony said, "No, I'm not 65. Are you 75? No, I'm not 75. Are you 85? Because he looked elderly. He goes, "No, I'm not 85. Well, then how old are you?" He goes, "I'm 108.
108.
108. And
oh, wow.
And he kept doing something he truly loved. And by doing something he truly loved, he extended his life. Because he shared a little bit of his story. He said, I didn't see it as cutting hair. I got to see the child grow up and become a man, and then become a father, become a grandfather, and he would cut the hair all the way through that generation, and then he would do the children's that came behind him. So can you see, he connected the basics of cutting hair with getting to know people through the generation. of their family dynamics.
He kind of grew up with them, basically.
Yeah, and it became part of him, and he became an integral part of their life. And he also had to keep adapting, because in those decades, hairstyles changed. They came and go. So that kept him interested, and that was another variety to the dimension of his work. So that's why I'm so passionate about this whole, evolve from a job, a career, to doing something you truly love. That's
an amazing story, and especially being as old as he was. And that kind of brings me to the next question, Tony. It happens here in America. It's not supposed to happen, but I don't know if it happens in Australia. It might there, but now I don't mind saying I am 50 plus years, and so I have not personally experienced this yet, but we've always heard of age discrimination. So in your experience as a career coach, do you see it harder? And I'll just name any company, and I'm not going to specify any company, XYZ Corporation, would rather hire a younger worker than an older worker? Do you see that, or no?
I would say that is typically the case. Although it's not overtly stated, it goes on subtly, if you like, Bob. And typically when a person, and that tends to be my most significant client base, is that person in their mid-40s and onwards, where they've been in the same company for 25, 30 years, and the organisation decides, you know what, we want fresh blood, we want innovators, creative people, tech-savvy ideas to come in and freshen the place up. Mm-hmm. And then there's this person with all this deep knowledge just gets thrown out the door.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless of how cruel that sounds and seems, I always come back to the principle that it's nature's way of saying you didn't belong there anymore. Okay, you got comfortable.
That's it.
Okay, the reliable, regular income, the people you interacted with each day, and nature said, no, it's time for you to go do something else. Shock to the system because they never saw it coming.
Yeah, most of the time you don't. Yeah.
Yeah. The strategy those people go with, Bob, is it'll happen to the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually it's them and they end up in the meat grinder. Okay. And I have to rescue them from that meat grinder because they'll go on with it and stew in it and get bitter and angry. And I say, no, it's nature's way of saying you belonged somewhere else. Let's work together, me as your coach, to find out what that something else is.
I like that. In fact, that's probably a good lesson. I'm talking now to my audience here that's watching this, subscribers and all. So something catastrophic happens to you at work, you find yourself suddenly without a job. I know it would devastate me, the shock would be, but I like what Tony is saying here. You've got to look at it that, to summarize, there's a new door going to be opening for you, or for us, if it happens. We just can't be looking back at the closed door, I guess we could say.
Yeah, you're quoting Graham Alexander Bell, who said the same thing. When one door closes, another one will always open. But we don't see it because we're too busy holding on to the other door.
We're looking back at the door that has shut, and it's welded shut now.
Exactly.
So. And I do that. I am guilty of that, Tony. I'll say I've done that. Whether not just job-wise, but other things that's happened. I'm always wanting to, I wish that door hadn't shut, when I don't see kind of what's in front of me. And then later on, and most 99% of the time, if something better is ahead, I'm thinking, why was I so, longing for that door that shut behind me, Yeah,
because it did offer you a regular income, and that's your survival base. But as I said, nature has decided it's time for you to move on. We had a slide we were going to show your audience, Bob, and it's
absolutely
time to bring it up.
Sure.
This is one where there's the three levels: the job, the career, the calling.
You want the one with the U or the hats? Which one are you talking about?
The one with the U.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, look at this carefully. I'm going to show a slide, and Tony will explain kind of what this is. So here's the first slide, y'all. Okay, so can you tell us about this, Tony?
Okay, so there are, as I would call it, three levels to a working life, and they're all growth. They're all, as the higher you go, you're growing. So the first level, we all start off at the job, the income level. Okay, and that's a good starting point as a junior. But as things progress, we also want growth and development and the fulfillment of our potential. If you look back at the phenomenon of the last few years called the Great Resignation, when they interviewed people stating their reasons for leaving, one of the common ones that kept coming up was they weren't getting the training and the development they were looking for that employer, so they left. The other one that kept coming up was they wanted to work somewhere where they felt they were contributing to a greater purpose. So you've got the base level is a job for an income. The second one is your career and your growth personally and professionally. And then there's the calling and purpose level where it becomes less about you and more about the people that you are serving. So Bob, if we go back, I think we can take this off now. So in the first half of my career, was very much focused on the income and the growth aspect. And you get a sense at some point that there is something missing. I share a story in my book about a lady who climbed the corporate ladder. She worked for a pharmaceutical company as a sales and marketing executive. So she gets to the top of her career ladder, and a moment that it was supposed to be a moment of celebration, she just experienced a sense of emptiness or nothingness. So all these symbols of success and status and power just didn't actually fill her with any sense of purpose or meaning. So I asked her, well, what exactly was missing from your work, given you had achieved so much success? She goes, there was no joy.
The thrill is gone, basically.
Yeah, if it was ever there. So she left that and now is doing something else in terms of alternative healthcare for people. But that's an example of if you don't have a calling or sense of purpose about your career, a bit like the barber did, there'll be a sense of emptiness about what you're doing.
Mundane,
Mundane, yeah. It would just feel like just work for the sake of it. And at the halfway point of my career, I had that same sort of feeling, that you get to a point, and I think a lot of people do, and the American singer Natalie Bassingthwaighte said, sooner or later, you get to a point where you ask yourself, why am I here? So then it just doesn't become about a job or a career, but it's, why do I exist?
What difference am I making? I've been there a few times.
Perfect. So that becomes, and if you haven't found it, you potentially have a bit of a midlife crisis or a career crisis, call it what you will. So I hit that point in my sort of mid to late 30s, and I took some time off work, and I went on one of those retreats where you're supposed to find, for 7 days, where people go there and you're meant to find yourself. So you do all sorts of practices, meditation, mindfulness, and all that time by yourself in solo confines.
Sure.
And then one day they took us all as a group to an adventure camp. And one of the exercises was to get people to overcome their fear of heights. And that was called a high ropes exercise. So you've got two large poles on either side, and you've got the one rope on the bottom and the rope on the top, and you're supposed to get across it. There's nothing underneath. You're holding on and you're going. Now, I had a fear of heights, so I wasn't too keen to do it, but I was supported, and so I'm climbing up one of the poles. So there's little rungs that you go up, and then I remember having to take the step from the pole onto the rope, and it took me a long time to let go of the pole.
Oh wow! I'd been scared too.
Yeah, and until I perched myself on the rope, and as I got on the rope, I noticed the rope started really shaking. And I said to the people below me, "Look, the ropes are shaking." And they said, "The ropes aren't shaking, you are." So I slowly made my way, and I got to the middle of this high ropes. And in the middle is really where it's the loosest, right? Because that's where the loop is. And I got halfway through, and I'm thinking to myself, I've got halfway here. That is pretty good. I should go back now. Back into safety.
Exactly.
And the people below me said, "Are you kidding me? You are just as far from the end as you are going back to... You may as well just keep going."
Yeah.
And feel good about yourself at the end rather than, being disappointed. So I took a couple of deep breaths, and they were very encouraging and supportive below me. So I kept on step by step, just sliding my perspiring and shaking hands across, and my feet were shaking. I'm just covered in perspiration with just anxiety. I make it to the other side. I step down, and I'm so grateful to land my feet onto solid ground again. And, I got a bit of an applause from the rest of the people. But what was interesting, even though I felt a level of satisfaction by having done that, two ladies who had decided, Bob, they weren't going to do that. These women were in their mid-40s, and they said, "No, we can't do it." So they came up to me and said, "Tony, because we saw you do it, we're going to do it."
Oh, your influence.
If you could do it, we can do it. I'm not sure whether that's a backhanded compliment or not, but
there's a compliment in there somewhere, I think.
Yeah, there was, but I think anyway, the ladies got up there and they did it, and then they did it far more easily than I did it, I can assure you, Bob. And I reflected on it, I thought, God Almighty, I got more satisfaction at having inspired and influenced these two ladies to go across than the satisfaction I got for having done it. So that's where the calling comes in. It's not about you. It's how you can enrich the lives of others. That's why so many people get thrown out of the nest, because nature is saying, you have served your 25, 30-year apprenticeship. It's now up to you to enrich the lives of others. Famous American industrialist Andrew Carnegie said, you can only get rich by enriching others.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100,000%.
Okay. So that became my pivotal moment. My learning was, okay, my greatest satisfaction comes not what I do for myself in terms of an income and growing, it's the difference shifting someone else's life. And that was the motivation for also writing the book.
You mentioned your book. I'd like to go ahead and display that for everybody, if I could.
Yes.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen. If you want more information, Tony's got some great information just on this show, period. But he's written a book, and let's display that book right now, and Tony can tell us more about that. It's called the Phoenix Career Principles. Tell us about that, Tony.
Right. So I wrote the book because, as I've shared some stories with you today, I had a few low moments early in my career whereby I had all the apparent signs of a successful career. I was highly paid, doing professional work, working for a significant brand in Australia, ample promotional opportunities, but something was missing, or something wasn't right. I hated what I did. I was doing this accounting work, which was repetitive. One week involved collecting these numbers. The second week in the month, Bob, involved organising these numbers into groups. The third week involved reconciling these numbers, so this side of the balance sheet balanced to that side. And the fourth week I would have to report on them. And then this cycle repeated month in, month out.
Repetitive.
And a bit like your story, am I going to be doing this for the next 35 years of my life? No way.
For sure.
Okay, so that became my motivation to start observing the people around me and how they managed their career. And there was a young gentleman, and I share his story in the book, and I'll share it here. His name was Perry. He did, Bob, exactly the same work I did. But here I was banging my head against the wall, and this gentleman loved what he did. And I'm thinking, Perry, please tell me, what am I missing here?
Exactly.
What are you getting out of this that I'm not getting? And he goes, well, I grew up on a farm, Tony. And on the farm, we had good seasons and we had poor seasons. And my parents had to learn how to take money from the good harvest, save it, so that when we had the bad season, we could live comfortably. But a lot of the farmers in our area didn't do that. They just spent it in the good times, and then when the bad times came, they suffered through that. That became Perry's motivation to become an accountant. And he had a vision, 10-year vision for himself, of opening his own financial planning business.
Oh, wow.
He saw what he was doing as an apprenticeship to his vision in life. I was simply coming in to earn an income. And it wasn't doing it for me on the other levels.
Sure.
The growth wasn't there, and the purpose element was not there. And I struggled with that. And do you remember the song by Paul Simon, Slip Sliding Away?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, beautiful song. That song would follow me around. I would turn on the radio at certain times, whether it was morning, afternoon, or night, and that song would be magically...
It was following you.
Yeah. I just couldn't understand. And there was a particular line in the story, Bob, that always would get me. And it would say, we go to work, we collect our pay, think we're gliding along the highway, when we're in fact slip sliding away.
That's it.
Okay. So what slip sliding away is that curve that goes up. Your opportunity to fulfill a greater purpose in life, enriching the lives of others. That's why nature comes in and says, you're out of the corporate tower. You're out of the bird nest.
Everything happens for a reason. Yep.
Yeah. And that's, I wrote that book because I, many years earlier, came to recognise the value of a book. I subscribed to a property investment magazine in Australia, and they would talk about the best locations in Australia to go and buy land and property. They'd also talk about the finance strategies, where you would get the best loan arrangements and that sort of stuff.
Wow.
But each month, Bob, what they also did is they would interview people in their late 20s and early 30s And they would interview them because they, at such a young age, had bought investment properties, several of them.
Wow.
And the interviewer in the article would ask him, well, what was the influence for you to go and buy these properties? And I swear, 80% of the time, 8 times out of 10, the answer they gave was, we read a book. And it always came down to the same book. Do you want to have a guess, Bob, what that book was?
Was it this one?
No, it wasn't around at that time.
Oh, okay.
The book was Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Oh, I've heard of that book. I've not read it, but I've heard of it. Yes.
So it influenced people's thinking to understand the importance of using your money to create assets, to build wealth so you can earn income from while you're asleep from an asset, not just work for money. So I drew on that lesson, the power of a book to change someone's perception, their thinking and their life. And that became the motivation for me writing a book, because there's a lot of work involved. Unless it can actually change lives, it's almost defeats the purpose. You don't want to just write a book to be a best-selling author or whatever. It's got to change lives.
Sure. Influence.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Yeah, let me put the book cover back, ladies and gentlemen. This would be a very good book for you to read from what Tony's talked about tonight, the Phoenix Career Principles. How did you get the name, the Phoenix Career? How did you get Phoenix from there?
Right, very good question. So the phoenix is the mythical bird, Bob, that doesn't wait for something in the outside world to come along and set it on fire, e.g. getting fired. It sets itself on fire, destroys itself, because it knows it will get recreated to become something else.
Like a metamorphosis, basically.
Yeah, it's that whole process. It's that transformation. You need to be able to set fire to the old aspect of yourself, e.g. the person who thinks their whole working life is just simply about a job for an income. You need to burn that. You also need to burn thinking it's just about my personal growth and power and status and success symbols. You need to burn that and grow into the one that's fulfilling a greater purpose and calling in life, enriching others.
Absolutely. That's great. It's a great analogy there. I like that.
Yeah. If you don't do it to yourself, that's when nature comes in and does it for you.
Being pushed out of the nest.
Yeah. And it can be brutal when nature does it to you.
Yeah. Rather do it on your own, for sure.
Yeah. That way you can control the fire.
Exactly. Well, I am going to, in addition to your book, Tony, you have a website. So I'm going to bring that website up right now. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is Tony's website. Highly recommend you take a look at it. Can they get your book from this website? Also, well, there's 2 questions. One, can they get your book from your website here? And number 2, what will our audience see when they click on your website?
When they go to my website, they'll find out a bit about my story and the different services that I offer people. And there's a couple of articles on the website if people are interested. To get my book, the best place to get that is on Amazon. So if they type in the Phoenix Career Principles, that'll take them to the various Amazon sites in their specific country.
Is there a way, now you're in Australia, but is there a way anybody like in the world can contact you, can get your advice, can get your services, even like here in America?
Absolutely. On my website, there is a contact page. If they want to leave their details there, they're welcome to contact me. So that's one way of reaching me. And if they want to send me an email, they can send me to info@tonypisanelli.com. So that's another way they can reach me.
That's awesome. Yeah, let you know how we. Oh, go ahead, Tony.
How are we going for time, Bob? Do I have another story I can
Yes, you
share?
do. We've got 15 minutes for sure. So
Okay.
we got to the slide that we haven't shown yet either. So I'll let you know
All
about that too.
I just want to share with your audience, Bob, that from my own observation, the most satisfying careers and the ones that can last through the most difficult challenges usually have a connection that goes back to childhood. And I shared the story of John Paul Young. That's one example, but you want more examples that actually reinforces that principle. And there's a story of a young gentleman. And in Australia, we have a famous horse race called the Melbourne Cup. I'm not sure whether you've heard of it, but it's a race that stops the nation. We even have a public holiday in Victoria on that day. And we have what's called sweeps. So sweeps are where people put in money and they get a number which is connected to a horse. And so a father was working with his employer, and he got a number for himself and he got a number for his son. So he went home that night and gave the young boy his number, which represented a specific horse. The next day, this is going back into the 50s, and you'll relate to this. So they're listening to the horse race, and the family had one of those big radio boxes, Bob.
They sat in the living room floor. Yes. Yep.
Okay.
The old style.
Yeah. So I think that might have had a turntable at the top. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Probably.
More than likely.
There was this big box. So the families gathered around and they're listening to the horse race. And funnily enough, the boy's horse, the boy was named Brian. The horse was called Evening Peel, and it won the race. Okay. But Brian he just did not get excited, Bob, that his horse had won the race and he'd won a few shillings. He just didn't register with him whatsoever. What he was more interested in was the man who called the race. He was captivated at how he could call all the names out and where they were in the field and predict the winner.
The announcer,
Yeah, so young Brian went looking for the man.
Wow.
Where did he go looking for him, Bob? He thought the man was inside the box. All right. So that became Brian's moment where he decided he was going to become a race caller.
Influenced.
Yeah. He became a famous race caller, and he got to call about 20 or 25 of those races, the Melbourne Cup.
Wow.
Okay. So can you see a moment, a defining moment where he's listening to a horse race, he wins the money, but he didn't care about the money. He cared about the guy inside the box. He knew he would become one day. And then there's another story, and I'll keep all these in the sort of the music genre because you've played in that space. There was a young boy, I think he was about 8 years of age, and his parents took him to a concert one evening. And they're in the Brisbane Festival Hall, which is a stadium here in Australia. And they're in the back rows, and the stage is dark. You couldn't see anything. And then all of a sudden, Bob, a spotlight hits the stage. Ooh. And a gentleman walks out and stands on the spot. And he says, good evening. I'm Johnny Cash.
Oh, we know that name well.
And that was the moment the young boy said, that's what I'm going to be when I grow up. And I'll do whatever it takes. And that boy's name became Keith Urban.
Oh, see, I never knew that story. I've never heard that. Yeah. He was influenced. Oh, Tony, did we lose you? Oh, Tony, I don't know if you can hear us. Wow. Tony, if you can log back in, we have lost you. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, I've said when you do a live show, we don't know, we can't do technical difficulties. So, Tony, hopefully you will log back in. We'll wait for you to come back. So, ladies and gentlemen, before, if he doesn't come back, let me just promote his show again. I'll promote his book. This is the book that he wrote called The Phoenix Career Principles. Hopefully that he will come back. Tony, can you hear us now? No.
Bob, you still there?
Yeah, we lost your camera. We can't see you now. We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay, hold on.
Okay. Well, I'll keep promoting your book here until we get your camera. Okay, almost. Okay, there you go. Okay, let me bring you back. We can see you now. Okay, like I said, when you're live, we talked about this for the show. When you're live, you just have to keep going. So we can see and hear you now, though.
The wonders of technology. But okay, we're back. So that was the Keith Urban story. So I've collected enough of these stories now to know your greatest career potentially resides in a childhood story.
You never know. Yeah, you never know what lives you're touching. In fact, I can use another analogy. They're like, when you talk to someone, whatever age they may be, and maybe you pass on, but the seed is still planted in that person's mind. On a personal note, really quick, I didn't grow up in church. I never read the Bible. I knew nothing about it. I worked at a department store. A lady came in, older lady, looking for a punch bowl for her 50th wedding anniversary. It was on sale, and it wasn't in the display case. I guess they sold out, but I don't know. There's something in me motivated me. I thought, this is her 50th wedding anniversary, so I bet we have some of those in the back. So I caught her, and I said, ladies, let me find it. Found it for her. She was so grateful to me, and but then she kind of asked me if I went to church. Of course, I embarrassingly said no, and I was 18 years old at the time. But long story short, she introduced me to the church. She invited me to her church. Unfortunately, I did not become a member. I was still studying. I had a lot of questions. She passed away, but now I've been a member of the church for over 30 years now, because of her. You never know who you're talking to, and how this. You may not see that seed grow in somebody, but the seed it's been planted for sure. Here's my personal story.
Defining moments, I call them defining moments, turning points. Yeah.
So I'd like to. You have one more slide here. It's one called hats. Did you want to talk about that one?
Yes. Given you're wearing a hat, I thought we'd talk about hats for.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, here is a slide. It's all about hats, metaphorically, I'm sure, but let's let Tony tell us about this slide. Okay.
Okay. So typically, when you're looking at your working life, ideally you go through each of the three hats. So the first hat is you've got this basic employee hat where you're just purely focused on earning an income and potentially learning the ropes. Then you go to the next hat, which is the manager's hat, where you actually start not only just managing maybe people in the workplace you work in, but also you start proactively managing your career, whereby potentially you're developing some sort of expertise that you believe can serve you not just with that employer, but beyond that company. Because if that company throws you out that nest, you become prepared. And that moves you then to the third hat, which is the entrepreneur, is your ability to take your core skill and earn multiple income streams from it. So like today, I'm essentially a teacher, but I earn my income from coaching people. I can earn an income speaking at different events, and I can earn income through my ability to write a book and the next book and the next book and whatever. So I've got multiple ways of earning an income. So I want to leave your audience with, how can you take what it is that you're really good at, some expertise, and spread it out to create multiple ways of earning an income, so that you're not dependent on one employer. Because if they throw you out the nest,
You're done.
yeah, or you take a significant hit, your ability to bounce back becomes more difficult. So that's another message I want. Start thinking. Not everyone's cut out to be an entrepreneur, but start thinking like one. The young people I talked about who read Rich Dad, Poor Dad still continued to go to work somewhere, but they were building alternate income streams through property, which allowed them to leave jobs they hated, potentially in their early 30s or whatever, so they could get on with doing something they loved.
Sure. Absolutely.
So yeah, that's another message I share with people, is becoming an entrepreneur. I suspect, Bob, the fact that you're doing this, you work in a job somewhere else. This shows me that you've got the entrepreneurial flame, to go back to the book, that says, I don't want to be doing that for the rest of my days. I want to set up something else.
Yeah. Like this, for sure.
Okay. And what you're really doing, and there's a biblical passage, Bob, that you're probably familiar with, that says, don't hide your light under a bushel.
Yes, for sure. I know that one.
Okay. What that potentially, if you took that and extended into the employment world, is don't hide your light in the corporate cubicle working for one employer, when your talent, your light, can be done actually enriching someone else's lives.
Absolutely. That's great advice.
Which is what you're doing. You're giving someone like me in Australia the opportunity to present a message that could potentially make a difference to someone in your audience.
I hope so.
Okay, so here you are actually being a demonstration of that principle of not hiding your light under a bushel.
Good. That's a good thought. Well, Tony, I appreciate you being here tonight, and I'm going to show your website again, ladies and gentlemen. Please go to his website. That's www.tonypisanelli.com. It's right here on the screen in front of you. You will find literally a wealth of information, and you can contact Tony. You can give him any questions you want, and just, I'm in America, he's in Australia, doesn't matter, he'll help you no matter where you are in the world. So highly recommend you check his website out. But I want to show his book again, ladies and gentlemen. This is on Amazon.com. It's called The Phoenix Career Principles, written here by Tony. So highly recommend. And if you can't read the little writing there, depending on where you're watching this on your phone, the subtitle below it, a description says, Rising from Employee Ashes to the Flame of Entrepreneurial Success. That's a great thought. And so, Tony, we're looking forward to reading your book, and hopefully we'd love to have you come back when you've written another book. We'd love for you to share it with us.
I'll keep that in mind, absolutely. And there is another book in the wings. So
all right. Looking forward to it as always. So, all right, Tony, have a great evening, and I think we appreciate you being on the show tonight.
And thank you also for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Bob. Thank you.
Good. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it all for tonight's show for the Van Buren Variety Show. As always, I'm glad you all have tuned in. And for those of you that have subscribed already, really, I'm humbled by your support. But those of you that haven't, whether you've subscribed or not, if you like Tony's experience or his talk tonight, make sure you hit that like button. He would appreciate that very much, and order his book as well. That sounds very interesting to me, and so I'm looking forward to reading it myself. And if you're not a subscriber of this show, make sure you hit that subscribe button. That makes me feel good as well. So that's going to do it for me tonight for the Van Buren Variety Show. I will be back next week with another guest at Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern. So I hope you all have a great week. This is Bob Van Buren. Goodbye.